sure that it is spread its wings and flown. And we've had several companies that have actually participated in this and have received their certification. So thank you guys. Now let's shift gears just a little bit. And I'm actually really looking forward to this session as well. If you ever wondered about how artificial intelligence, AI, can help mental health professionals instead of replacing them, you're in for a treat. Our next speaker is Dr. Stephen P. Hancock. He's a registered psychologist in Bermuda and a licensed mental health counselor in Indiana. He holds a doctorate, a master's, and a bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of Indianapolis and is a member of several leading psychological associations. Dr. Hancock brings a straightforward, empowering approach to therapy, offering individual, group, and marital counseling, as well as psychological testing for intelligence, personality, and career guidance. His experience spans with work in depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, grief, and domestic violence, supporting both victim and offender. Prior to relocating to Bermuda, he led services for adjudicated youth, worked in private practice, and taught at the collegiate level. Let's bring to the stage and welcome Dr. Hancock.
Good morning, everybody. I appreciate the warm welcome and kind of a review of my history. I've been practicing in Bermuda roughly 19 years in total, and I've been in private practice almost 23 years. Uh, as mental health care providers, we all share in the goal of providing the best care to the most people, right? Here. When we explore the concept of AI, it isn't here. I'm not here to replace the therapist. I want to use it as a tool to meet the growing demand for mental health support. Coming off the pandemic, as it was mentioned in the previous presentation, it really highlighted the cracks in mental health care globally, not just in large jurisdictions like the States or Canada or the UK. We're noticing it across the board. And given that, however governments dealt with it, people were kind of locked in a cage and told they were going to die, right? So for a lot of people, it highlighted the cracks. It also opened up new doors for us to explore how people were going to respond, and it kind of also really pushed telehealth as well as the AI agenda. So in this presentation, I intend to present the rationale for AI therapy, some of the goals for AI in therapy, and also three specific roles. And that was going to be clinical augmentation, therapeutic engagement, and precision care. This is not designed to be inclusive of everything. It's to kind of hit the major points and whet your appetite a little bit to see if this is something that either you can engage in as a client or as a patient, or something that as a professional you'd be willing to utilize in your practice. So let's just start with the rationale. Why do we use it? It offers 24/7 support. When people see me initially, it's usually weekly or every other week. So sometimes that support it's got time between it, right? And so where AI is an advantage is it can actually give people access almost instantaneously at wherever they are at any given point to kind of process some of their thoughts or what they're thinking through. Anxiety, or let's just use anxiety, for example. People will go down the rabbit hole when they do Dr. Google, right? And whereas when people utilize the AI chat box, the AI appears to not only offer the information, but then it does seem to challenge the overgeneralization or the catastrophizing. So you see that it can be a very useful tool therapeutically as an augment when they're not actually working with their therapist. And what AI also does is it also helps us bypass geographical, financial, stigma-related constraints. I mentioned earlier that there's a global shortage, so people are seeking out all kinds of therapy and wherever they can find it, right? As an example, I work in 7 to 8 different jurisdictions: US, Canada, Bermuda, UK, Zimbabwe, Kenya, Saudi Arabia, and New Zealand. And in part because there's just that global shortage, but also there's that ability now to bypass some of the geographical and financial issues related to it. And, it's important to be mindful that because when people walk into the office, uh, they have a wide range of desires for who they want to work with, whether it's male, female, race is important, gender identity is important. And with AI, a lot of that can be bypassed because it doesn't care. So what another reason or another rationale, I should say, for AI is enhanced comfort. And again, that's that reduced stigma. When, even though a therapist should be mindful of what people go through, you're still a human being. And there are times that you feel for what the person is going through, and people pick up on that. Whether it's empathy or not, they feel judged. And so one of the advantages of AI is it can reduce the stigma and provide, they can be anonymous. So they normally their information is not tracked anywhere, it's not kept, it's an interaction, then it's deleted. And one of the other, again, it's also personalized. So when AI engages people, it analyzes an enormous amount of data, whatever the person is putting in, it allows them to create the parameters, and then the AI program can really tailor the intervention. And it's also consistent. If you work with me versus one of their providers, I take a very straightforward approach. I'm very data driven. Someone else may be a little bit more touchy feely and maybe more empathic. So, and it doesn't mean that we don't get to the same point. There's even between professionals, there's inconsistency in approach. So AI offers a level of consistency. So if you transition someone from one to the other, they get the same kind of information. So from that, there are two primary goals for integration. The first primary goal is not to replace therapists. AI does not replace the human therapist. It serves as an augmentation tool, which is designed to enhance empathy, objectivity, and efficiency. It's also designed to increase focus, which it's about helping clients, right? So you want to improve outcomes. You want to create accessibility over a wide variety of needs. There are three ways that we meet the two goals I just mentioned. The first is the clinical augmentation, which is automating administrative tasks for the psychologist, therapeutic engagement, providing continuous support and skill practice, and then precision care, which is really tailoring interventions for specific populations. And in this presentation, I want to cover neurodivergent and also something like bipolar disorder. So one, AI supporting the psychologist. AI maxes the therapist's time and focuses their attention on the client relationship. So for instance, automated documentation, AI tools like Helios or Mentalic automatically transcribe sessions and generate compliant notes. So back in February of this year, I went on a kind of a review of several different programs. I tried at least Mentalic and amongst others, Supanote.ai. And what I learned was that all of them use kind of the same framework for how they structure and take notes. But where you get the difference is how specific or the situation. So for instance, I believe it's the Mental LC, it's much more hospital based. So it gathers a ton of information and all extremely useful in a hospital setting, but really didn't match well with what I do in private practice. My program that I chose was the Supanote AI, and what that does is it puts it into it. So basically, what happens is when you upload your information, so you're doing a session, whether in person or telehealth, and it records video and audio, and then it transcribes it, then it processes it into a note, and then deletes itself. So nothing is kept on the web, nothing is kept on your computer, except for whatever that generated note would be. And then you copy and paste the note into whatever format you use. So the client's information is protected. And by the way, this program is HIPAA compliant in the States. So it meets all the rigorous requirements for privacy. And what happens is normally you go over that in your it's in our PIPA. As Bermuda implemented the PIPA laws January 1 of this year, it's included in our informed consent, as well as we discuss it in that first session. For your knowledge, it came down to functionality for me. And I've done 667 notes since the beginning of March, and I love the program. It works well, even when there's a problem. Let's say, like yesterday, actually, their website had an issue. Their program, it doesn't delete it; it just holds it until they fix the problem, and then they're able to go back in and actually finish the job. So, in the entire time that I've had this program, I've never not been able to get my notes out of it. So again, it's a phenomenally good program, and it saves an enormous amount of time. That's one of the other administrative effects is it cuts research. And again, research is pretty limited right now because this is so new, but they're suggesting that it can be a reduction of 70%. And for me, I can quantify that into about 4.5 to 6 hours a week. And I think the joke is, and I just said this to one of their providers in our office, and they're in Bermuda, was for the first time in 23 years, I am caught up on my notes. I'm not behind on something, right? So from a therapeutic standpoint, it allows for people to kind of stay on top of what they need to do for the patient versus all the admin type stuff. When you see in-session analytics, so like when I get the note, it analyzes tone, voice cadence, micro expression, facial micro expressions, and natural language. It looks at real-time feedback by giving the therapist patient engagement, emotional shifts, missed moments. When as a therapist, when you're covering an hour's worth of information, sometimes during that session, people jump topics, they jump ideas, and you have to navigate, how do I interrupt, or is this something related? And so there are times where you might miss some of the therapeutic impact. And with AI, it can give you some of that real missed moment kind of opportunity to kind of either go back and engage it or make the change in the moment. It also helps with treatment planning. When you look at like outcome surveys and you look at the insurance's desire to kind of track things to make sure that we're being useful and that people are getting what they need, the treatment planning function gives you that. It gives you a way to measure starting point, midpoint, and then at termination. So it gives you enhanced clinical insight both in session as well as outcome. It also can streamline some of the administrative tasks, things that in a practice just take time. You have to hire people for, scheduling, for instance, managing calendars, processing billing, generating clinical notes or summaries, consumes an enormous amount of time. When you look at all the people that I went to university with and then graduated and then subsequently went on, a lot of them tried private practice. And working with people was never the problem. It was all the administrative stuff. And again, because psychologists run on a smaller level, having admin staff is expensive and most small practices can't afford it. And so what happens then is the person then has to take on that responsibility. And for instance, in my practice, I'm the IT guy. I'm the facilities guy. I set up our database and programmed it. I have my hands in a lot of different pot. I do all our billing, or not billing as in insurance, but like paying the bills with lease. And all that seems small, but when you collectively add it together, it's huge. And that's then what also helps streamline is it reduces the burnout. So between people not realizing the extent and how much time they're going to spend, which on average is for me about 10 to 15 hours a week, to reduce burnout through freeing up the time, you see the lack of wear and tear, and then what that translates to is you being able to engage your patients much better. So how does it support the patient? Obviously, the most important part of the conversation, right? Well, people have used, in my office, have used ChatGPT. They use Gemini. It's some of those are free. Some of them you can pay a small amount. You can gain greater access. There's something called Wobot and Wisa, which use large language models to deliver the guided therapeutic exercises like CBT and DBT, as well as psychoed. A lot of what we do in therapy is provide people with information, because a lot of the information that's circulating in the general public is inaccurate. It also increases accessibility for patients. So it provides support during high periods of stress. So here, I'll just give you an example where that works well. So sometimes with people that have pretty intense anxiety, it hits them at various points. There's no rhyme or reason. There sometimes the triggers are obvious, sometimes they're not. And when people suffer through anxiety, sometimes like sleep is a difficulty, and you'll see them at 2 in the morning, and they'll have this almost panic attack. But what do you do at 2 in the morning? Uh, my office isn't going to respond to a call, and it's not really severe enough to go to the hospital. So the reality is that person is stuck at 2 a.m. suffering through an enormous amount of anxiety. And where the chatbots becoming like GBT or Gemini is the person can engage. And one thing I often tell people is you can't have two thoughts or two feelings at the same time. It's physically impossible. And so one of the best ways to interrupt anxiety is through deep breathing. It's a focus. It's shifting the gear on a cognitive, emotional level. And people understand that in a session. And we talk about very specific ways they can do it, but it's hard. Sometimes that translation into real life can be difficult. Or, when you're in the middle, when you're in the heat of the crisis, it's kind of like everything is forgotten. And where uh, some type of AI program can be an asset is in that moment, you can access the things that we've talked about. You can set the parameters. And what you see for people is that they're able to start bringing themselves down to a more manageable level because they're thought stopping, they're engaging the program, their emotions are regulated with the thoughts. And so, whereas historically they would have suffered through, and which would have made it worse the next day, they can get a kind of a handle on it. And so we can reduce the intensity. And the beauty of that is it also, if you save it and keep this information, it gives you a way to be preemptive, right? Which is a lot of times the biggest issue when you see significant moments like that happen, like a panic attack, is you want to get ahead of it. You want to do prevention because, to be honest with you, in therapy, once you're in the middle of something that you're feeling, it's virtually impossible in that moment to make significant change. So it's getting ahead of it, it's practicing it, and it's putting you in a position to be successful. Some of the other ways that can help would be with emotional awareness and regulation. So object tracking. Therapists will often use journaling in therapy. It lets you get your notes out or your thoughts into notes. You can look at it, you can review it. It's a way to track current situation, also a way to kind of go back and evaluate change. And a lot of times with people, they get that kind of like they purge. So if they're struggling, they get that purge and they feel better afterwards. And AI kind of does that with you in the interaction. It's a way to journal the experience that you're having and the way that you're coping with it. So with that, it also can suggest coping strategies. So when AI, if you have the chat version, and sometimes even in text, it can identify emotional distress, and it can immediately suggest personalized grounding exercises, guided breathing, mindfulness techniques, some more supporting emotional regulation in real time. So in my office, like for instance, we do deep breathing techniques, we do progressive relaxation, and that can take 45 minutes to accomplish. And we're doing it in my session one time, and then I give them the document that they can carry through. But people aren't walking around carrying a document that I handed in their back pocket. They're not keeping it beside their nightstand. And again, like I said earlier, when they're in the heat of feeling something, it's a struggle to try to make change. So what this does is it gets them in the moment. It gives them a way to release, a way to purge. It gives them a way to kind of come back. It gives them good coping strategies, and it gives them an opportunity to navigate some of the things we've done in therapy in a way that kind of expands it in personal space. That's kind of one of the biggest advantages with AI is what we work on in therapy gets taken and in real time gets used. And that's not a slight on people. That's just reality of life. You go home, you got to go to work, you got kids to take care of. Maybe you're not feeling well. There's other things going on, and practicing your therapy at home in your spare time sometimes is difficult. And so this really gives us a way to kind of add that therapeutic component in people's personal space. So let me use specifics. So the role, the third role I said was precision care, right? So what does that look like in real time? You know, AI offers structured, adaptive, and low pressure environments to tailor processing needs. So let's talk about the two most often cited are going to be ADHD and autism, right? And you're going to see a lot of ADHD in practice. Autism, especially in the youth, is definitely people will invest in. When you see them as adults, it's almost like they figured out how to survive, and they're not people that are autistic as adults don't often seek out therapy on their own unless some other event has happened and they're trying to figure it out. So with AI and working those specific populations, we'll start with like ADHD and autism. So what AI offers are adaptive platforms. So it's communication tools, virtual assistants, because especially with ADHD, you're going to have to manage executive functioning. And for that, just as a reminder, what executive functioning is, it's your ability to make decisions, its ability to plan, organize, focus. It really is kind of the mechanism that we navigate the majority of our life. And when people have ADHD, that gets disrupted, and so you see some of the best laid out plans don't materialize from my practice or our session into real life because there's time in between and there's nothing that they can physically hang on to. The other side is with, like, for instance, ADHD, there is a pleasure seeking component as that you have to deal with as part of therapy. So even if you have the right answer, if they don't want to do it, they're not going to do it. And that's kind of one of the hallmark symptoms with ADHD is sometimes the information is almost it's counterproductive with how they're going to actually approach it. So where AI comes in is if they were to go through something, let's say they forget a test, like let's say they're a university student, or maybe they forget to turn in something at work, they can start navigating that conversation with AI and they get that immediate feedback and they also get real-time ways to schedule or to focus that they didn't have to try and figure out themselves. And that's huge because it's no longer massive effort trying to get to a conclusion. It's probably a pretty practical and easy way to navigate whatever that moment is. And because it stays on their phone or whatever they're using, they can reference it. So whereas we talk about how to do it, and sometimes we do it in session, they have real-time experience where something can click and they can control the parameters of that specific moment and probably give them a more useful tool in that moment. So, and where you see it kind of bypass that pleasure side of it is they they get kind of reinforced in the conversation, which is pleasurable. So you see less rejection of it and you see more of an embrace. 9 times out of 10, when I come out of a session with someone who's dealing with ADHD, like let's say finances, that's always a big deal because their money's all over the place and they'll go buy stuff randomly or they kind of like a certain thing and they go after it and they overspend here. So you're really battling the reality. They understand the reality. It's not a matter of understanding, it's that pleasure component. And I think AI does a great job intervening in those moments and helping move along session progress. Also, and I've said this earlier, it's an augmentation tool. So people that struggle with communication. So let's shift to maybe someone that's high functioning autism. They won't make eye contact. They'll give you very short answers. And again, it's not them specifically doing something wrong. That's just part of the disorder. And so when you're trying to navigate some of those conversations, that kind of interaction, that verbal interaction can be part of the problem. And so AI, because it's written, it's not social, it's kind of vanilla. And because of that, it is more appealing to someone who may struggle. And also with it being text to speech or predictive, it also can help kind of get stuff out of people. You know, Well, I tell people this all the time, and I'm gonna I'm gonna semi-summarize quote Carl Rogers, man. He was a humanistic theorist, and when he gave his idea of how to do therapy, he said that a patient will tell you their story 100 times, and it's that 101st time that a light bulb kicks on and change occurs. And so, even when I've worked with people for an extended, we're talking about the same topic, what happens is we'll have that moment where it was said just slightly different, or some kind of new piece of information was brought into the session. And so people are able to take that moment and go, oh, I got it now. And that's why AI can be so powerful, is because it gives that ability outside of my office where, people are saying, okay, I talked to Steve, this is what we did, bang, bang, bang. And they create the parameters, and then through their interaction, they get to that 101st time more quickly. And so, again, it's not that we won't get there. This just expedites us getting there. And I find that it's been wildly successful for people, especially whether it's ADHD or autism, to help them find that light bulb moment. It also helps with AI. Also helps with emotional recognition. That's one of the other problems that people face with neurodivergent brains. The software can help identify and label facial expressions, voice tones. People, in a lot of high functioning autism, they have the desire to be social, but they function in a way that doesn't. They struggle to understand social nuance. They struggle to understand facial expressions, and AI software can help them, give them input. There years ago we used to have this sheet and it had, God, I don't know how many, like 50 faces on it, and it would label under each face some kind of expression. And I would hand that to people, and I mean it was the best we had at the time to try and help people understand an expression. Well, now with AI, it gives them real time feedback and also more realistic expressions. And so they're able then to understand the moments better. They may not be able to feel it better, but they understand it better. And then they can create functionality over what I call functionality over feeling. Sometimes it's better for someone who is either ADHD or autistic. Sometimes it's better to understand how to engage the moment rather than try to feel the moment. So, knowing when to laugh at a joke, even if you don't find it funny, it's socially appropriate because that was a funny joke. And so it's not perfect, but it keeps them somewhat connected in the moment. And AI can help with that better understanding of social and nonverbal skills, as well as enhance the ability to participate in society rather than just suffer through it. Because, if you suffer through it long enough, you're just going to avoid it. So this is a way to kind of bridge that gap and help people stay somewhat connected. Where it also helps, and this is where I want to talk about like mental illness, significant mental illness, uh, bipolar. You're not likely to see schizophrenia in practice. You're going to likely see that at the hospital. Although I occasionally will have that in practice, but in that situation, those people are medicated. They're managing themselves well, and we just got to keep them on track. Like something like bipolar, AI helps transition care from reactive to predictive. So treatment compliance is always the primary problem in any significant mental illness, and medication and management is the biggest offender, right? So, and people will go, okay, well, why is that? So let's talk about mania for a second. When people feel manic, they like it. It feels good. Now, to the rest of us, it seems like chaos and it seems problematic. They're not sleeping. They're sleeping 2 to 4 hours a night. They have outlandish claims. They engage things that get them into trouble. But in that feeling, it's light. When you add because this is a neurological disorder, you start with medication management first. There's no amount of talk therapy in the world that's going to help someone with bipolar until you have their brain chemically managed, right? And so the first option is you get the psychiatrist involved. The psychiatrist will prescribe some type of mood stabilizer. In that mood stabilizer, this is what a lot of people don't understand is clients are in one notch of depression. So if this is even, when people take this medication, they feel slightly depressed. So imagine you don't get that high associated with mania, and we stuck you in one level of depression. And so people don't like it and they will revolt over time. And it's not them being problems, it's just that they like the high and they don't want to feel depressed. So what happens then, like with uh, bipolar disorder, you'll see people, well, first of all, using what they call digital phenotyping, right? AI continuously analyzes passive data from wearable devices, sleep duration, activity variance, social isolation, voice changes. Uh, I don't know how well Garmin or like the Apple Watch would sync up with that, but that would be an example of where AI would take information given to identify any type of problem. Because remember, when I started this part of the presentation, I said we want to be predictive rather than reactive. So with that comes early relapse detection, right? So what we notice, are there biomarkers that correlate with impending mania or depression? Sometimes days or weeks in advance of it actually happening. We also can see the impact of the predictive warning, allowing psychologists and psychiatrists to kind of jump in more quickly. Because again, earlier intervention, the better the outcome. So we can adjust medications, we can talk about sleep hygiene, uh, just trying to mitigate or avert a full episode. Where you see it also as an advantage is in crisis management or risk assessment. So it can flag significant deviations in behavior or emotional state, heightened risk of self-harm, relapse. And self-harm can be like self-mutilation, like the scratches, or to the extent of even suicide. And what that again does is it prompts the therapist to either reach out or to kind of get ahead of it, so that again we don't reach that point. When I said this to you before, I'm going to say it again. In therapy, if we wait to the moment of truth to deal with something, we fail. Because when you're in the heat of whatever's going on, nothing works. There's some things we can do to calm down. It's more about taking ownership, taking control ahead of time, and then making sure that we don't put ourselves in harm's way. So with bipolar as well, you see then a way to help manage some of that unhappiness with what's going on. Well, Steve, I'm partially depressed. I never, with a mood stabilizer, you don't enjoy the happy stuff. That's what also frustrates people. So not only are you in one stage of depression, you're also the things that would normally make you smile, friendship, a spouse, kids, sports, whatever it is that you like, gets tainted. And so your world becomes slightly gray all the time. And so that's where by one, becoming more preventative versus reactive, but then also processing that and how to kind of try to stay afloat is huge. And AI again gives that reinforcement after the session. If your life is slightly gray and you see Steve once a week, that is not sufficient to take off the burn of being in that gray space. AI offers us a way out of it. And as I mentioned earlier, that's through journaling, that is through that interaction back and forth. And sometimes just the sheer acknowledgement and affirmation is enough to get us through that moment. So again, when we look at the value of AI, it's in time savings, it's in objective clinical insights, it reduces burnout. For patients, it's 24/7 skill reinforcement, it's accessible, it reduces stigma. And when I also gave you the specifics about neurodivergent patients like ADHD and autism, it's a structured environment, it communicates support, and it offers us some social skills training. And particularly with severe illness, it can be predictive relapse detection and precision treatment guidance. So in a lot of ways, AI, I mean, we're just scratching the surface of this. And I don't think that you could ever not have the therapist in the room. There's a human element that people need. AI is not going to give a patient a hug at the end of a session, right? AI, sometimes you have to engage a patient in laughter. They need the human element. and AI can't do those sorts of things. So it's great for information, it's great for precision, it's great for the things that I've outlined, but there's a whole human component that unfortunately it can't. Well, I don't know if that's unfortunately for me, it keeps me to a job, right? But the reality is we are only scratching the surface of it, and I think there's a lot more to come. And in particular, I think where that will be also an asset is as we look at treatment outcomes, as we look at ways to improve our science. Just as a reference point, psychology is not, it's a soft science, right? It tries to be like medicine, where medicine has tons of research and outcome studies. We want to be that way. But we're rooted in philosophy. We try to be the objective observer, but we can't quite connect that like medicine can. And so in a lot of ways, this will help us get to advance our profession further, but we're always going to have that human element that's necessary to maintain that. You know, so then people then turn on because everyone talks about AI, it gets uncomfortable, right? People are well, they see the value of it, but Steve, it's a machine, right? So there are some ethical implications that we do have to address. Consent is always the first. It's being transparent, explicit, and making it mandatory for any audio recording or data monitoring. And for most of us that do use it, it's already in our PIPA agreement or HIPAA compliant data, or not data, document. And we give that out to every person and they have to sign it, right? But that's not simply enough, because I don't know about all of you, but when I go into a doctor's office, I'll fill out the form and I'll sign it. I'm not going through all that. Yes, yes, yes. And so what I also do, and I know all the professionals in my office do, is we review informed consent in that first session to make sure we're on the same page. And again, just as a repeat, when I started this session, when I use my software, it records audio and video. In that, when I am finished with a session, I then process the session, and it takes all that information and puts it into a note. Once it's in the note, I then copy and paste it, or I review it and then put it in my own format. Everything's deleted. So it is our responsibility ethically to ensure consent is obtained and understood. And then behind that becomes the privacy, that the data is encrypted and handled using PIPA compliant software and protocols, which it's sort of in the most recent our legislation for PIPA in Bermuda has been around for a while. We just recently implemented it. So a lot of these things didn't exist. So what I have done is I've tried to find, like HIPAA compliance, the state's privacy does address this. And so that's how I've been able to, at least for now, feel like I've secured consent, privacy, and protected people's information. And I'm sure that as we go through the next couple years of review of the PIPA in Bermuda, that we will find a way to enhance it and to really make sure that we have it clear. But just as an FYI, what that also means then is your software. We have what do you call them through our routers? We have it's called firewalls, things that we can do to protect information. But again, nothing is saved into the system nor put on the cloud. So it would be mostly what's in your notes. And then one thing that you do have to worry about sometimes with using these software programs is we're still in those early days. And so it gives us information that's kind of collected over a very short window of time. And so it's got a lot of bugs in it. So you got to kind of make sure you read through it. You got to make sure that when people come back, that some of the things that AI has discussed with them in their chats are rooted in reality. And I think that if you can kind of manage that bias and protect both you and the patient in these moments, it gives you a really good tool to kind of enhance your practice. And we talk about this, right? So one of the responsibilities as mental health professionals is peer consultation and supervision, right? So I meet with Dr. Ray, Darian Ray, on a regular basis. We talk about ethics. We talk about software. We try to stay on top of it. And then I think also, as I've seen my patients more and more use AI in our sessions, then it's kind of forced me to have to go learn more about it because I need to understand what are the limits, how can it be an asset, and that way when I'm navigating these conversations with people, we don't like we keep it positive, like it's workable into what we're doing. It doesn't become counterproductive. Yeah. So, you know I ripped through this presentation quickly. AI, we're just scratching the surface of, and we don't know exactly where we can go with it. So I don't want anyone watching this or come open up for some questions. I don't want anyone watching this thinking this was the end all be all, but it's a starting point. It's a recognition that we can use this in our sessions for us as providers to be more efficient, to make room for people, to prevent burnout. But then it also becomes a really useful tool for helping patients in a session navigate emotions, thoughts. It really it people used to call it the homework, right? I'm going to send you home with homework, and I hated it. I hate sending people home with homework. I want them to take the challenges, the things we talk about, and build something from. I want them to feel empowered. This tool helps us with that. So it's accessible, it's easy. It doesn't demand documents. It doesn't demand them having to, well, what did Steve say? Or what I also noticed early in my career is I would give people this what I thought was this amazing summary of what the session was about, and here are the things I want to focus on. And they'd come back in the next session and they'd interpret it completely different. And so what this has allowed is for however the session has been interpreted, they process and then they come back, and I can use that. So I guess as for mental health professionals, I I thoroughly enjoy using it. I think it's been a huge asset to help people, and from a clinical perspective, it has literally saved me 4.5 to 6 hours per week in clinical notes. Now, I use AI other programs too, just because this was more their direct practice and also direct client. But on a personal level, like I also use a program called Grammarly, which I know a lot of people do in Bermuda, and that has been profound in my writing. I think I write well. I feel that I communicate effectively. It's bruised my ego a few times as I've written these letters, but it's been right. The whole point of when you write something to somebody, whether it's a court, because I write a lot of court letters, whether it's to a patient, to someone who's doing testing, you don't need to be cute. You need to give information that's useful. And I think that Grammarly really helps with that. So I use that particular AI program in my writing, and it goes through emails. It goes through. You can put on your phone if you want. So messaging, if you use some kind of end-to-end encrypted software, like in messaging people, like WhatsApp. So again, I for the session, I know I focus primarily on direct client interaction and practice management, but there are other smaller software programs that can be very beneficial as well. I know I chewed up 40 of the 45 minutes in the presentation. I thought I would open up questions because, again, even in my practice, as far as I know, as the first person in my practice, I've been sharing with people. I've been bringing into my office, hey, check this out. Luckily, I use conference call centers because it removes the background noise, so speech is clear. I have 4K cameras in my monitors, so it gives there's an equipment side to this too. I guess I probably should have mentioned that, so that it can maximize every bit of information in what we do. So I thought, I've just opened up a few minutes. If you have any questions or anything that you want me to review again, I'd be more than willing to do so. No questions? Well, while I'm waiting, if there are any questions coming, one thing, there is apprehension for most people. And I mean, I was apprehensive as well, especially back in February when I started to kind of review the programming. And once I got through it, I need a program that's rapid fire. Like I'll end a session, maybe have a few minutes and go right into the next. And so the program then processes the session, but it still allows me to go into the next session and record. Some of the other programs, like the one, the Mental YC, that one is definitely geared for more of an institution or some type of hospital setting. And it says as much. And it is wildly thorough. The problem that I had with it was I would do a session, it would process, but it wouldn't let me start the next one until that one processed. And given the enormity of what it was kind of gathering information for, it was disrupting my session. So that was one of the things that I kind of navigated through when I processed it. And also, it's a bit unnerving when you think about switching over to AI from just a humanistic perspective, right? We as a presenter, or not presenters, as therapists, want to connect with people, and so you're afraid that somehow will become, we lose the humanness of our sessions, and it doesn't. It only seeks to enhance and gives people advantages that maybe before we didn't have. So I don't see any questions, so I know we're at the end of our time. I've thoroughly enjoyed this presentation. I hope I've given you information that works for you. And if you ever need any questions, my practice is Milestones Limited in Bermuda. We're just outside of town. We're easy to find if you Google search us, and we'll go from there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Hancock. This has been a wealth of information, and it's so important because everyone's talking about AI and it's going to take over the jobs and everything else. And what you provided today has been insightful and helpful, particularly to those that have practices that have been concerned about this. And I also think, like, our youth that is out there trying to get the degrees and thinking like, hey, what am I getting this degree for if AI is going to be able to just diagnose people and start helping people. So thank you so much for your contribution, and we're going to make sure that this is available online as well, so as many people can watch it as possible. So everybody else that is watching, now we are about to head to our breakout rooms, and the breakout rooms are going to be on stage A and stage B. We've already introduced the speakers, so what I want you to do right now is exit from main stage, select the speaker, the session that you want to be a part of, you want to participate in. You can ask questions, you can engage with the speakers, and you can go and do that right now. They're going to see you back on main stage after networking, after lunch. Remember, when you finish your workshop, you can hit the networking tab, and that will allow you to be able to meet people that are in the virtual space today. It'll give you 3 minutes per person. It's automatic. It's actually really, really cool. So we will see you back here after the networking. You guys take care and pick those sessions and go ahead and head there right now.